We had a range there in carcass from 360 kilos right up to 506 kilos was the heaviest bull. This year, the fact that there was such a demand for beef and that the bulls were thriving so well, we weigh them here every month. The bulls were performing very well. They weren't going over fat, and the factories weren't putting down any restrictions on carcass weight. So it made sense to keep feeding them, putting on 1.2 kilos of carcass. When you take the feed costs off it, it made sense to feed them into, I suppose, those heavier weights this year anyway.
Hello and welcome to The Beef Edge, the Teagasc Beef podcast, for all your latest news, information and advice for Irish beef farmers. I'm Catherine Egan, and this week I'm joined by Noel Prunty and McWeeney from Teagasc Ballyhaise to get an update on breeding season and to hear how the bulls performed finishing under 16 months. Before we start, Noel, can you give an update on how calving went this spring?
We're happy enough how calving went. We started calving, commenced calving on the 27th of January and it finished up on the 1st of April. We have 37 cows that calved down with 38 alive calves. So we had two sets of twins, and unfortunately we lost one set of twin a week calf after birth, and we lost another cow aborted before the start of calving. So we had two mortalities in total, but we still have over one live calf per cow gone to grass.
And in relation to breeding, when did breeding start, or how is breeding going at the moment on the farm?
Yeah, so we're coming near at the end of breeding here now on the farm. Now, we did probably start a little bit later this year with the breeding season. So we started on the 22nd of April, just trying to match cows calving going to grass. So we commenced breeding with the cows on the 22nd of April. So they'll be 9 weeks breeding by next Tuesday. So we'll probably stop breeding around the 20th of June. So a 9-week breeding window for them. Our first calved heifers this year, we decided to start them 2 weeks later because we found that maybe trying to get the heifers out the grass here at the beginning of February can be hard weather. So we calved them 2 weeks later, and we're using all Angus bulls in them, so there will be shorter gestation. So we delayed the breeding for heifers. So we're going to breed the heifer for 6 weeks in total to 100% EI, the heifers. And we synchronised the heifers. Whatever heifers weren't observed after 7 days and standing in heat, they were given estimate on day 7, and all the heifers were bred inside 10 days to EI. So we were EIing on repeats since then. And the cows we bred for first 3 weeks of EI with mostly maternal, Limousin, Simmental and Solaire. And some of the cows that we didn't want the breed replacements of, they were served to a terminal Shirley sire. And then the stock bull then went out to clean up repeats for the remaining 6 weeks. So we're hoping to pull breeding around the 20th of June. So we have to eliminate April calvings, because we found it very useful to have Noel calve the 1st of April, especially when we're finishing groups of cattle, that they're all the even bunch. It leaves it a lot simpler.
Particularly when you have a 9-week breeding season, Noel.
We calve 86% of the cows in 6 weeks, so we're trying to calve as many of them possible. That's probably the reason we're going out with the stock bull after the 3 weeks, trying to keep it as compactly as possible.
Liam, Noel mentioned there that you're calving all the replacements at 24 months, and the fact that you're breeding, selecting high replacement index sires on cows for calving through AI. How are heifers managed this year up to breeding?
They're over the winter to be on good quality silage. We'd have our first cut silage here be over 70 DMD, was 73 this year. And they get that along with about 1.5 to 2 kilos a meal. We keep an eye on them. They'll be weighed every month over the winter to make sure they're performing. And then I suppose the aim is, the key with those heifers is to get them out as early as possible and to get them cycling. I suppose because you want them cycling at 15 months. We'll be breeding them here, as Noel said, in early May. So look, they were turned out in early March. I suppose the other important thing that has to be done with them too, we'd have a strict herd health policy here. So their BVD and lepto vaccines, they would have been given them in early March, and they would have got the booster shot in early April. So that's BVD and lepto. And I suppose that the target there is to have them in around 420 kilos at 15 months. And they were all on target at we weighed them there before breeding. They were averaging over 420 kilos. So that's basically the management. Make sure they're on good quality grass, and look at the breeding has went well with them.
In relation to grass, Noel, how are you managing grass at the moment?
Yeah, I suppose in the last couple of weeks, in the last month, I suppose with the dry spell of weather we had, typically speaking, normal year we'd be able to take out paddocks for surplus silage, but we haven't probably had that comfort to be able to take out the surplus silage until this week. So we had to do a bit of topping with a disc more in the last week or two. But we hope this week to take out actually surplus paddocks out for bale. So we're kind of operating between 9 and 15 days rotation length. Now, we did get our first cut silage completed on the 7th of May, and we did get taken out surplus at the same time then, but we haven't got a chance to take out surplus. We haven't had the scope to be able to allow us to take out say heavy cover. So we had to, during them dry spell weather, we were forced to go into heavier covers there for which we would have rather skipping, but just quality did deteriorate in the last fortnight or that, but we hope to rectify that by taking out surplus paddocks over the next 2-3 weeks to rectify some of the paddocks. But in terms of grazing season, look, it has been a fairly relatively easy grazing season. We hadn't that much wet spells of weather, so even the more marginal parts of our farm, we were getting good output out of them the last over the grazing season.
And how are you managing the different grazing groups that's on the farm?
Yeah, so the main grazing group, we were operating the breeding heifers and the cows for the first 3 weeks of breeding. They were all ran as one bunch, but then when we let the Shirley stock bull out with the cows, we had to operate replacement heifers as a separate bunch. So there's 8 replacement heifers there in one bunch. So when we pull the stock bull with the main group of cows, the replacement heifers will be great joining back up the cows and calves as one group. And then our main beef heifers then, along with 2 cull cows and their calf that weren't selected for breeding for various reasons, they're operating a second bunch. So we probably will scan then come in at 35 days around after that, after breeding. So whatever cows are, heifers are, and calf will be joining that other bunch.
And what's the plan for grass in the coming month with regard to the amount of time stock are spending in paddocks and how often they're rotating?
Yeah, so we're operating, roughly speaking, every 3 days. We're trying to move them on, and we'll hope to be taking our second cut silage out in maybe a fortnight's time, and we'll be that second cut silage going to be coming into the grazing season, so we might be able to allow us to take out surplus grass off paddocks that haven't been cut, just to try to improve the quality, overall in some of the paddocks. And we'll probably try to extend our grazing season come mid-July to build up covers going into to extend the grazing season coming into the autumn, late summer, early autumn.
Liam, for the system you're operating, silage quality is very important. Were you happy with this year's first cut of silage?
Yeah, look, we cut the silage, I suppose, back in ideal conditions back in around the 7th of May. We had a good crop, I suppose. We probably went early aiming for that real top end silage. I suppose it's important here because we were finishing cattle and trying to grow weanlings during the winter. So we have a requirement for that good quality silage. As I said, we cut it there in early May, and it averaged 7 bales to the acre. We baled all our first cut silage here in the suckler herd, and that'll be used for the weanlings and for any of the finishing cattle over the winter. So that's the first cut silage, and then the second cut silage. We have around 25 acres closed up for second cut silage, and this will be cut, I suppose, early to mid-July, depending on the weather. And I suppose the aim of that is trying to, little bit more bulk. That'll be used for feeding dry cows mainly over the winter. So generally cows come in here in good condition. So we generally, that average type silage, if we get around 67, 68 DMD, it's more than good enough for the cows we have here anyway. We find that's ideal for them. If we make it any better than that, you're ending up restricting silage and it just gets that bit messier. So we generally aim to have it in around that, the high 60s.
In relation to the bulls that you're finishing under 16 months, how did they perform?
Yeah, look, I suppose we were very happy. They were killed there last week. We had 15 young bulls, so all the male calves from the suckler herd here is kept as bulls. We don't castrate any of them. They perform very well. The average live weight of the bulls were 730 kilos, and the carcass that came into a carcass of 430 kilos with an average kill out percentage of 59%. So the bulls were all weighed on the morning, just at loading before they went to the factory to try and give us as accurate as possible in terms of a kill out percentage. We had a range there in carcass from 360 kilos right up to 506 kilos was the heaviest bull. And look at, I suppose, some of them heavier bulls, in other years it's kind of risky, but I suppose this year the fact that there was such a demand for beef and that the bulls were thriving so well, we weigh them here every month. We decided to, we generally try and kill all the bulls as one batch. It doesn't make much sense killing them in 4s and 5s, so we generally kill them in one batch. And we did have a few of the heavier carcasses, but look, as the bulls were performing very well, they weren't going over fat, and the factories weren't putting down any restrictions on carcass weight, so it made sense. It made sense to keep feeding them. We were weighing them there, and we found they were still doing 2 kilos live weight gain per day at 59-60% kill out. It's 1.2 kilos of carcass we're putting on. So look at they were still leaving an awful lot of money. Putting on 1.2 kilos of carcass when you take the feed costs off it, they were still. It made sense to feed them into, I suppose, those heavier weights this year anyway.
In particular, when they're already managed together, as Noel mentioned, like they're all calved within a certain period, they're all the same age, going in one group together. How are the bulls managed over the finishing period?
Yeah, look, it's a simple enough system. They're weaned in mid-October. They're left outside probably until around early November, mid-November, depending on the weather. They'll be on meal at that stage, on about 2 kilos of meal at grass. They're brought in, they're put on good quality silage. They're built up to about 5 kilos at Christmas. So come Christmas time, early January, they're on 5. And then after Christmas, then we kind of start ramping it up. 5, 6, 7, and they'll be on ad lib probably round the first, second week of February. They'll be on ad lib concentrates. At that stage, then they're coming a year old. We'd aim to have them around 500 kilos. It's generally a guide for us to keep them, or a target is to have them around 500 kilos at 12 months old. And they were just ahead of that this year. And at that stage, they're on ad lib. They're eating probably somewhere in the region of 8 kilos plus at that age. And then they're on ad lib from, I suppose, early February until when they were killed there last week. So, and I suppose they hit a peak of around 13, 14 kilos of concentrates. I suppose, look at under 16-month bulls, it's a high input, but definitely this year it's a high output system, and it's a lucrative enough system, I suppose, especially when the market is the way it is. So that's mainly the management. Look at this, they stay in their one groups. So, the one thing with bulls is you don't want to be upsetting them, you don't want to be mixing them. So the group that them bulls go into back last November, they're in groups of an 8 and a 7, and they never change groups since to avoid any fighting. And it's all about just, I suppose, routine and keeping them settled and keeping them performing. We find the rubbers work well as well. We have rubber mats on the slats, and we had no issue at all this year with lameness with young bulls. So thankfully they went off without any problems.
And how did they compare in comparison to last year's bulls that were finished?
Yeah, look, they're a good bit ahead, I suppose. They might have been fed on a couple of weeks longer. There was probably a few smaller bulls in it last year. We had 2 sets of twins, and there was a few smaller bulls that probably pulled down the average. But this year's bulls, they're 40 kilos carcass ahead on last year. And as I said, the main reason for that was they were fed on a little bit longer, and there was a few smaller bulls in it last year pulling down the average. In terms of money, I suppose they're over €2 per kilo. I think around 2.20 this year ahead compared to last year. So it makes a big difference.
In relation to the heifers being finished on the farm, Noel, what are kind of the key targets for finishing the heifers, or how are they performing at the moment?
Yeah, so we weighed them there last week, and they're averaging about 475 kilos. Now, these will be a mixture of the heifers from our first calved heifer, so there will be some lighter ones in it bringing down the averages, because some of our other half the heifers are being retained for breeding. So they're averaging around 475, one with the other. What we typically do the last number of years, what we have been doing is come September, we'll draft off probably them Angus cross heifers that have been bred off our heifers, or some of the continentals that are off our Angus cross cows, or the early maturing breeding cows, and we'll slaughter them in September, and the remaining heifers then will be housed, depending on grass availability, and they'll be fed for a 6-week finishing period, and all the heifers will be slaughtered before December, for Christmas. And also we'll slaughter any of our cull cows. They'll be weaned early and fed with dispatch, and all our cull cows will be killed off grass. So the only heifers we will be housing is the more continental type heifer that we find that the last number of years we've had paid to put them in and feed them for longer.
And in relation to herd health for the cattle, what's the herd health plan for the herd for the coming weeks?
Yeah, so look, we're monitoring them there herding there every day. So we're keeping an eye out for coughing and say how stock are thriving. But we do be taking dung samples, and typically we'll be going by our dung samples to see when we go in with our first wormer for our calves. The last number of years we haven't been going in with a wormer, typically speaking, around mid-July. And also we normally go in then and treat our yearling heifers, but we have to be cautious of withdrawal periods if we're going to be slaughtering some of them heifers off grass. So they're the main 2 groups of stock that we will be keeping a close eye on.
That's great, Noel. And finally, for anyone that's listening that's interested in completing an agricultural course, where can they find out more information?
Yeah, sure. Look at there's information on the Teagasc website. If you want any further information, you can contact the office here in Ballyhaise, or we will be having our open day on the 5th of October, I think, October the 5th, 2025. So there'll be a college open day that day. If you want to come along, you're more than welcome.
That's great. Thanks very much, Noel, and thanks very much to Liam for joining me today and for the update from the Ballyhaise farm.
Thank you.
You can catch up on all other shows and interviews from the Beef Edge podcast on the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie, or you can listen on Apple and Google Podcasts as well as Spotify. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe so you never miss a show. For all other updates from our beef programme, keep an eye on our Twitter and Facebook pages. Until next time, I'm Catherine Egan and thanks for listening.